Hello, I'm Keith Smith of the Fuel New Business Podcast. So I made a new connection on LinkedIn last week. I've been seeking out experts in broadcasting to try and up my game. And through a connection of a connection, I found Jonny Gould. You'll know his voice from thousands of sports and news broadcasts, and I thought it'd be useful to have a chat with him and see how I could improve what I do at the Fuel podcast. I also wanted to talk to him about his company, Radio and Social Media Broadcasting Limited, which is growing into a media company for the 21st century. What follows is a wonderful couple of lessons. Firstly, be prepared when interviewing professionals who are used to being thrown into live broadcasting situations. They've got a unique ability to switch into presenting mode in a flash. Us mere mortals don't. Jonny suggested we record the video live and just go for it. Secondly, in new business, always be prepared to face your fears. A wise man called David Bowie once said, "If you feel safe in the area you're working in, you're not in the right area. Always go a little further into the water that you're capable of being in. Go a little bit out of your depth, and when you don't feel that your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place to do something exciting." So this is me, unedited, about to go a little bit out of my depth to further the cause of the Fuel podcast. My extreme thanks to Jonny Gould for pushing me in. Oh, and if I look a little ragged, it's because this interview took place at 6:30 in the morning, US time. But I was just interested in how your business now, your broadcast media business. I mean, do you have an ambition to turn that into a sort of a full-on sort of media empire?
Keith, long before the internet, I provided bulletins in news and sports.
Sure.
In the early 90s. The barriers to entry are so low now that literally anyone can do a bad podcast with a bad idea, and it obstructs the better output out there. And even since I started my podcast, I've noticed that the spikes are more dramatic at the beginning, and they trend faster because there's an enormous amount of confusion out there, and recommendations are absolutely key in a way that they weren't even 6 months ago. Apple put out an announcement, didn't they, that there were 1 million episodes, 1 million podcasts out there. To me it sounded like a complaint.
So yeah, seeing as they started the fight in the first place.
So look, the good news is on podcasting is that you've got two opportunities. First of all, the production values are everything. And by the way, the Fuel podcast is a most entertaining cacophony of sound. So you've got me roped in there. So thank you for that. And I like to do the same thing with my podcasts to try and make them interesting, to produce something of high broadcast quality that obviously comes from someone who allegedly knows what he's doing. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that unlike radio, you've got another chance to annoy your audience, okay? Because in radio, if the DJ says something really inane, and boy, oh boy, there's every possibility of that most mornings, you go, oh, I can't listen to that anymore. What an idiot that person is. Or, oh, Jason Donovan again. Why do they only play 300 records on this radio station? The thing about being on a podcast is you can say something a bit daft, or you can go a bit boring for about 30 seconds. The good news is they've got a little plus 15, plus 45 on the podcast. So you get another chance, okay? So what I've noticed is that the quartiles of listening figures, and that's very interesting. If you produce a podcast of, I don't know, 3 quartiles, 45 minutes, it's possible that your third quartile might be bigger than your second one. And that is because someone has given you the benefit of the doubt. So you've got to say thank you to people who listen to the end of the podcast.
And they're just skipping through to the end. Is that the idea?
They're skipping through. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Really good.
I've never. I must admit. I obviously have the analytics running on the shows, but I've never kind of broken it down, to that degree. I mean, I'm just pleased if anybody actually just listens to it in the first place. But
well, that's great. But in radio, like what you'd expect is a little graph that would, people getting less and less interested. But one thing they kind of do is, and they go up a bit,
right?
Which is absolutely super. One of the most captivating podcasts also was my longest one ever. And I was kicking myself because the conventional rule used to be, don't make them longer than 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, because people will lose interest. That's not true. I did a fascinating interview with Deborah Feldman, the author of Unorthodox, which has been a Netflix smash. It's a great human story about a woman who ran away from an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community to live a multicultural life in Berlin. Like you couldn't have two more opposite cultures there.
Wow.
And this woman was so captivating. I can't be wrong here. I can't edit this. And it ended up at 1 hour and 2 minutes. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to air with this long, boring droll. I have to tell you something. Of the 100% of people that started the podcast, 86% of them were still listening at 59 minutes.
Right.
And
Yeah.
this woman just rattles off her massive intellect at a pace that I couldn't edit. I mean, it was 1 hour and 7 minutes. I took 5 minutes out of it, but that was it. Every single other word and sentence was joined up in a way that
you couldn't get in there. That's fantastic. And I think that is that's, you bring us an important point, actually, because to noobs like me, it's very difficult to I mean, you know, when you listen to somebody like you with a sort of a polished show and a sort of the experience of interviewing people, there is there's an ability to kind of not cut somebody off, but to sort of steer them away from the point they were about to make, which was going to be another 5 minutes long. So, you know, I'm sort of I'm very aware of that, and it's obviously a skill in interviewing. But do you think there's a big difference between, I mean, you've obviously got, I mean, you've got your work with Aston Villa, which is consumer facing or public facing, and then there is the sort of B2B element. Do you think that there are two different types of listener?
Yeah, and you know, it's like ultra local radio. I mean, the way that I was brought up on local radio in the 1980s was to localize everything to the point where we had to be distinct from Radio 1. We might have been playing the same records as Radio 1 and possibly Radio 2, but we had to be distinctive. And so therefore on Beacon Radio, in my sports job, I would lead with Wolves, then Albion, then Villa, then Walsall, and in that order. And the news team would have to lead with, you know, a factory in Tipton before the Ayatollah's death.
Because it's the local first.
Exactly. I mean, however small the Tipton sort of story was, that's why people would tune to Beacon Radio.
Right.
The accents of the people, and they are distinct in the Black Country, I can tell you that for nothing. But we have to be different. And the thing about our podcasts is they absolutely have to appeal to the community, because the other pressure that we've got as podcasters are that they don't let it wash over them. With radio, you know, you might put a radio on in the car and tolerate the presentation because it's preset to Radio 2, even though perhaps you might not like everything you hear from it. But on the podcast, you actually have to press the button to want to hear it play.
Sure.
Every single person who's listening is not only treasured, but also needs to be looked after so that they press that button again for the second episode. And you can see the initial enthusiasm of some podcasts that get 90 people in their first episode because all their friends have listened. And they keep going, and the idea wasn't a very good one, and they're down to 12 or 15. And then they think to themselves, oh, shall I jack this in? And they do. Yeah. And you can just see that from the analytics. I'm quite proud to say that my audience for all the podcasts has maintained consistency, and in some cases has risen. And there may not be a great deal of money in this, but if you can get you have to, it's a trial and error business. All businesses are trial and error. You know, my sports media business was a trial and error product. There was a 13-month gap between my first and second client. There was a 13-week gap between my second and third. There was a 13-day gap between the third and fourth.
Okay.
And so it went on, and I suddenly understood what the product was. So I listened to my customers, and away we went. I do have a sponsor for my business podcast. They're great supporters. And what I want to say about those guys is that the irony of doing a small and medium enterprises podcast during the COVID era has actually set the product on fire. the idea that you can talk to people about not just Brexit, but what COVID's done to their industry, and there are some big winners out there.
Yeah, sure.
Is about digitalization. That's the first thing, which is effectively what we're doing now, because we may have even met up in the old days of before March, but now we're never going to do that.
No.
We're doing it on Zoom or Skype. And the other thing is to pivot. And that means to look at your range of products and work out where the market is and just do that. The most amazing example, Keith, from SMEs was a tourist attraction, which was a 19th century flour mill, which attracted people at weekends in Lancashire. Oh, look, this is how we used to do things in Lancashire. This is how we used to do things. We used to scrunch up the flour and we'll make the wheat, and I don't know what I'm talking about here, but it was like people who looked a bit like Rhodes.
Not big on flour.
People who looked like Rhodes Boyson, great industrialists of the 1860s, right? And obviously the doors suddenly shut on their museum, and no one was allowed in. And basically, what was there a shortage of at the beginning? There was a shortage of pasta and bread at the beginning of the lockdown. So they turned their tourist attraction into a working mill and started making flour and selling it to supermarket suppliers and bread manufacturers within a 50-mile radius. I mean, that is the most extraordinary pivot.
That's a proper pivot. Yeah,
it's amazing, and well done to them, because it's amazing that some industries are now even more relevant in the 21st century from the 19th century than they were 6 months ago, and that is a salutary lesson for all of us.
Well, I just want to go back onto the thing you said about the audiences. I mean, to a certain extent, you have an advantage over the rest of us kind of B2B noobs in terms of the fact that you bring an audience. You already have an audience. You've got a sort of a even if it's 300 people, it's 300 more than most of us sort of start with. So I think there is definitely something that's different from radio, between podcasting and radio, in that with podcasting you have to start from nothing. You start with nothing, and then you have to slowly sort of feel your way through. I think with radio, you inherit a seat to a certain degree, and people either stick with you or come to you or gravitate to you or whatever. But with the B2B thing, it's quite difficult, and the people that I speak to in the B2B area are kind of very we're all kind of just feeling our way through things and trying to work out what works, what doesn't, and stuff like that. But I think is there a correlation between radio shows and podcasting, or are they two different animals? Because I know I think of a radio show when I produce mine, and that's I'm still not sure I'm in the right space for it. I mean, is there that element?
Well, they are different media. It's a bit like a Kindle and a book. I mean, believe it or not, those are different products too. So I think you have to treat radio and podcasting as, cousins, but not anything closer than that. Because if you listen, for example, to Americast, which is the American election coverage between John Sopel and Emily Maitlis and some other bloke, an American guy in Virginia that talks like that. I don't really know what he does, but maybe he's the producer that they let have the microphone to. It's very informal. In fact, in other times it might have got them into trouble, but the BBC seems to be the Teflon Don of journalism, where none of their presenters can get into trouble for doing anything. Emily Maitlis left the podcast in the middle of the show, which I thought was an awful disrespect. And I'm an idiot for not switching off at that point in protest. I listened to the rest of it. But they broadcast in a completely different way to the way that they do on news, which is very formal, into the barrel. Here I am outside, the White House, and President Trump said this, and President-elect Biden said that. They don't talk like that at all. In fact, they're quite informal. So my tip is keep it informal and respond to the quartiles. Respond to who's listening to what and when. The most dramatic one was in this. I go back to this Deborah Feldman, where the audience kept on doing that and kind of went up a bit towards the end. At 21 minutes, it suddenly did that. Went back up. It went down to 50%. I thought, oh no, what happened? there. And I thought, did I swear? Has the audio gone dead? Did something go wrong? And I actually listened to it, and it was me previewing what else you could see in the series. It was like a trail.
Okay.
What else
Yeah.
you can listen to right here on the podcast. And people don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that. They'll subscribe if they want to. So
Right.
I was using radio values to encourage audience to stay on my radio station frequency, when in fact that's not how it works. So I clicked it out. And over the period of about the next week, I noticed the curve getting less and less dramatic as new people came on board. And so over the quartile, it flattened out, and now it's virtually gone. So it's an amazing thing in radio and podcasting, a different medium.
So, okay, well, I mean, that being the case, I mean, with your own business, with your podcast to one side and your Aston Villa involvement to the side as well, I mean, have you got the intention of building up a stable of podcasts? I mean, is that the idea?
Yeah, I have a very deep sponsorship and speech relationship in radio. So I know how to gather editorialized sponsors for speech. I'm probably one of the biggest experts in the country in that. But it used to be reliant on huge audiences. This is a very, very different niche sale.
Right.
So you have to sell within a very, very small environment. And Keith, though you said to me, you know, if you come with 300 people who are fans from your radio career, they're only fans if you talk to them about what they engage with you on the radio about. Now,
Yes.
If I'm starting to talk about Villa, I'm going to lose almost all of them, because, you know, most of my talk radio listeners were not Villa fans. It's as simple
Especially
as that.
your Arsenal fans.
Yeah, are you an Arsenal fan? Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the other day. I'll save you the misery. It was great for us. But so that's the first thing. The second thing is SMEs. You know, but then again, you know, it's all about the content, Keith, and that's what I'd say to you. If you're a newbie, or if you feel you're a newbie and you're feeling your way, just the content will cut through. I assure you. Just make it good and the best you can. Your podcasts are interesting. They're good. And you've got high production values. I actually didn't think you were a newbie at all. You've had a real proper go at this. Keep going, even when you're dispirited about a lack of audience, that you think, oh, that should have got, I don't know, 1,000 listeners, but it only got 400 or something. There have been a number of my podcasts where I thought, why did it only get, 600 there or something? And there are some, like Deborah Feldman, which got 30,000.
Wow.
And I can't believe it. And it's still motoring away. On some days, it's the second or third most listened to podcast, and I did it 6 or 7 months ago.
Okay, well, look, a couple of things on that. Firstly, the one of the things that I've noticed is that with podcasts is that they have longevity, in that they have a second, third, fourth, and fifth life.
Yes.
And certainly I've noticed on the analytics that the numbers go up the longer the show is there, because I think more people come to it and then they think, okay, well, I'll listen to the other ones as well.
Yes.
And stuff like that. So there's definitely that is one stark difference between podcasting and radio. But the other point that I'm looking for confirmation for is that it's very much down to guest participation as well. I've noticed, in that you can have some I've had some great guests on, and that you'd expect would normally bring 500 to 1,000 extra listens and all that sort of stuff, and it's crickets out there. And it's crickets out there because they do very little in terms of participation. I mean, the stuff that I've learned recently has been through the deployment of social media, and basically having the guest. So when the show goes out, the guest then responds to it on social media saying, thanks for having me on. Thanks for the interview, whatever, the chance to talk about such and such. and then a conversation starts going, and then they start roping other people into that conversation. So there's a kind of a real difference in terms of actually trying to get the guests to put their weight behind it, whereas opposed on radio and TV, the audience is already there. Whereas I think there's a definite guest participation element to podcasting. Do you think?
100%. And the more guests you have on, the more of a community you build. And there's the kind of the ideal guest is someone who's got loads of friends and who's much loved, who doesn't do much media. So, for example, a very good guest for my Jonny Gould's Jewish State podcast would be Majid Noaz. He would be a fantastic guest, but I'm not going to have him on because he's on the radio every week and everyone knows what he stands for. And he says it in his own show. So A, he'd probably say no to me because he's busy. And B, I'm not going to churn out stuff again that he's doing on the radio.
Right.
However, I will get on someone from the Muslim community like Ed Hussein, who is similar in viewpoint to Majid, but he's still a religious Muslim. So for a Jewish community audience to hear a Muslim community member who's still religious, but is open-minded and believes in the reform in his own religion and discusses concepts of Israel that you rarely hear in the Muslim world, and he's an author rather than a broadcaster. Bingo. There's your audience.
Yeah.
He's good. And he was a fantastic guest, and he's become a great friend. And that's the other thing about podcasting. You can have a serious sit-down discussion like the old days, with a cup of tea and a microphone, and you have like a grown-up conversation. It's like night school. It's like university degree. If you follow a schedule of intellectual pursuit, it's so interesting. And I hope I've grown as a human being in my podcast journeys because of the people that I've spoken to who've been so instructive, so educational, so humble in so many different ways, so cultured, and well, they've smoothed over the rough edges of me. I can tell you, Keith.
But I mean, have you got any ambitions to go beyond? I mean, the one thing that I love about podcasting is just because I grew up with radio. Radio was just something that was very near and dear to me. So I grew up with the ability to do things and listen at the same time. And I think that's one of the things that I love about podcasting is that it's an audio. It's an audio product. I mean, is there an advantage? I mean, have you noticed an advantage to doing audio and video, or do you want to specialize? Do you like to specialize in just the audio side of things?
The audio is obviously a craft that I've done for decades and decades, and so it is a comfortable listen. Video is a very new environment for me. Not that I haven't got a lot of television experience, but it was as a presenter rather than as a producer. I've noticed in my early days on YouTube that though the audiences are not bad, they're no bigger than my podcasts. In fact, my podcasts are still bigger.
Right.
So I thought YouTube would take me on like a sort of super highway of thousands of audience. It hasn't done. So I need to work out why that is, and quickly change it. But I am going to keep producing video because I've learned how to do it.
Right.
And it looks good. I mean, this looks very good. We're doing this in video.
Well, you look good. It's bloody 6:30 in the morning where I am.
Is it really? Well, it's your.
This is my morning face.
Well, not bad, Keith.
But so what's in the pipeline now for you then? I mean, where do you go after this?
Well, in the immediate term, I'm producing 2 podcasts next month for the SME community, right. And it's all been about digitalization and pivoting, particularly in the last 6 months. But this one is even better because this is possibly the greatest industrial story ever told. because I visit, when I say visit, I would have gone in the olden days before March to physically the factory where this was happening. I talked to the chief executive of a company which is at the cutting edge of making components for ovens, for, glasses, for, dishwashers, the tiny weeny little plasticky, screwy things that are, there is millions and millions and millions of pounds worth of industry in those tiny screws.
Those little things that you look at and you go, I wonder who the guys behind all that.
And exactly, and there's importing and exporting, and they come from different countries. If you took apart a microwave, all of those tiny components are made by different companies in different countries.
Sure.
And I am interviewing a company called Brandauer. They're in the jewelry quarter in Birmingham, and they have been going. They are so amazing, this company. They make all sorts of components. It's a great podcast. They've not been around 20 years. They've not been around 40 years, 60 years, 80 years, 100 years. They go back to 1862.
Wow.
And they still make their original product, which is pen nubs. So as well as all the kind of, screws with the plastic ends on them. They're an amazing company. So metal forming is next month's SME. And I talked to the president of the Confederation of British Metal Forming to say that manufacturing in my part of the world is not dead. And that's great. And I asked him the question, why didn't you pack off to China like everyone else did in the 1980s, like Viners of Sheffield? They ain't in Sheffield, they're in Chongqing now. They make their stuff over there. Right. And it's very sad. And he says, well, the expertise is still in Birmingham. So Peaky Blinders of 21st century. I am. And it's great. And I'm proud.
Well, it's having a renaissance, isn't it? The Midlands, they're definitely having a sort of a new birth now. But so I mean, just very very quickly before we wrap this up, the pandemic and podcasting, surely they were made for each other, weren't they?
It's true. I mean, that was the pitch to my sponsors at the beginning of the SME series, that I would physically go to factories, that I would talk face to face, and I did. I talked to some amazing companies, right, about their industries. Again, I went to see a company called Blighter, which is in Great Chesterford, which is still the countryside in Essex.
Oh, I know. Yes, I know Great Chesterford.
Yeah. It's in Saffron Walden. Yeah, but it's still medieval. There's still fields around there. And then there's this industrial estate where this genius set up a radar company, which basically protects palaces, troops, presidential buildings, airports from drones. And he started it in his back bedroom, and he just happened to be from Great Chesterford. So it's another sort of great English engineering story. These guys who are sort of, enthusiasts with magnets and screwdrivers who have a pen in their ear, those chaps. And then he's got this business, and it's amazing. And this is what England's about. It's just amazing.
So do you think podcasting's giving this and is shining a light back on what is possible? Because I think for a long time we've all thought globally and thought about expansion into other countries and things like that. That podcasting has the ability to still, like you were talking about earlier with local radio, that podcasting could actually supplant that and become a way of being able to, to get behind local industry.
Absolutely. And there's something else that I should tell you, Keith, and that is for you to keep in mind that because you speak English, you cross more borders and boundaries than almost any other person in the world just by dint of your mother tongue. Americans are beginning to understand our kooky accents, because soft power has slipped across the Atlantic a little bit. And when you think about the soft power that the Queen has, immense soft power, and you think about all our rock stars and our music it sounds American, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Like the Beatles and Elton John. I just want to say, Elton John, he's a funny looking fella, isn't he? But he is an example of immense talent crossing borders because he's English. No matter how he looks, it's how he sounds. The guy is a genius,
Do you
right?
think he
And
would have been even more successful if he'd have looked like Brad Pitt then?
well, I'll tell you something. If he'd been Elton John, he'd be playing, you know, Montreal, and that's your lot. Montreal and Paris, mate. That's your world tour. Belgium. But he's not Elton John. He's Elton John of Northwood Hills, and his music sounds American. Let's be honest. And he sounds a bit American sometimes. Yeah, man. All right, yeah, man. He makes his T's into D's. But
it's very difficult. It's very difficult.
He's the example. He's the prime example for me of soft power.
It's very difficult to sing in an English accent, I think, unless you want to sound like Noel Coward or David Bowie or something. No.
Exactly. I tell you something though. My favorite guys were singing in their accent, because of course people like Thin Lizzy, they sung in American, didn't they?
Don't say Jasper Carrot.
No. My favourites are actually the two fellas look a bit like us. Actually, the Proclaimers.
Oh, fantastic! Yes.
I mean, they sing in unadulterated Scottish.
It is.
I absolutely love their songs.
A letter from America.
Hey, I'm on my way. They're great.
And they walked 500 miles.
Yes, exactly. Which isn't far enough. They're so good.
I actually got involved with the I have a very tenuous involvement with the Proclaimers, because they played the Greenbelt Festival when I was with my band at the Greenbelt Festival as well. So back in 2004. So yeah, and I was nodding terms with them at one stage, you know, which is just as well, because I'd probably never have understood them if we'd have got into a conversation.
Well, I think they're great. I'm a massive fan.
Yes, absolutely. Jonny, listen, thank you very much indeed. This has been a baptism of fire for me, because I didn't even know we were going to do this. So I appreciate you forcing me to do this, because I think it's just pushed my my sort of confidence factor a bit as well. So
absolutely, it's not brain surgery. It's not brain surgery. Just do it. You know, set up a tape recorder. I would warn people, like, you know, I said at the beginning, you know, don't be rubbish at it. If you're not happy with it, and if you think it sounds no good, on balance, it probably is rubbish. So you have to use your own sort of judgment, because everyone's a radio listener. Everyone knows what's good radio and what's bad radio. I mean, I sometimes think, you know, can I put this out? And then I go back, even if I published it, I go back and I edit it again.
Oh, well, there's nothing wrong with a bit of editing. I think that's all right. But this is gold, Jonny. This is gold.
Well, we'll find out with the audience. They're very, very brutal on the internet.
All right. Well, listen, thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate that. And I hope that we can pick this up again soon and have another chat later on. But I think it's been very enlightening, and I can't wait to find out sort of your next iterations with the business as well. So and I hope you become a big force in podcasting, because you've got a great spirit, and I think there's it's nice to have the enthusiasm in the podcasting business, and nice bit of focus on it. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Keith. Kind words, and we shall catch up soon. I shall look forward to the next episode of the Fuel Podcast.
There you go. I will get you to do our jingles from now on. Take care, Jonny.
See you soon.
See you soon. Ta-ra.
Bye-bye.